There is a place where people do not linger, where even the air feels temporary, as if something is waiting for you to leave or to stay. A crossing of roads where directions blur and the world seems to hesitate. Just for a moment. For centuries, people have whispered the same warning. Not to stand there at midnight. Not to speak your desire out loud. And never to look up when you hear footsteps behind you. Because something there is waiting. Not a monster, not a shadow, but a presence that knows exactly why you came. Before this story ends, you will hear the words that were spoken at the crossroads, the ones witnesses claimed they could never forget. And you'll understand why those who walked away were never truly free again. It's a story about what people are willing to give up when they believe they have nothing left. And when the final question is asked, ask yourself one thing. Would you have answered differently? Long before the devil was given a face, people believed the world was not as solid as it appeared. There were places where it bent, where it hesitated, where the space between one moment and the next grew uncertain. Crossroads were among them. Not because something lived there, but because nothing stayed. Travelers spoke of a strange stillness that settled when they stopped too long. The wind would soften. The night would feel closer. And sound itself seemed to listen. In old villages, children were told never to play where roads met. Not after sunset. Not when the lamps were lit. Because crossroads were not meant for waiting. They were meant for passing through. It was believed that every choice left an imprint. That when a person hesitated, truly hesitated, the world remembered. And sometimes, it responded. Those who ignored the warnings said the feeling came first. A sensation of being seen, not by eyes, but by intention. As if the dark itself leaned forward slightly, curious. And when that feeling arrived, the stories claimed there was only one thing left to do. Keep walking. Because if you remained still long enough, the silence would begin to feel attentive. And when silence listens, something is already close. Most legends do not begin with desperation. They begin with exhaustion. The people who stopped at crossroads were not thrill seekers. They were not searching for demons. They were farmers who had lost their land. Mothers who had buried children. Men whose lives had narrowed until no path forward remained. They arrived at night because night offers privacy. Because despair prefers darkness. Some came with offerings, coins, food, objects once loved. Others brought nothing at all. They only stood and waited. The old stories say the waiting was the hardest part. Minutes stretched strangely there. A heartbeat could feel like an hour. An hour could vanish entirely. Some claimed they heard footsteps. Others swore they felt someone stand beside them without ever arriving. But almost all described the same moment. A realization that whatever they had come to ask for they already knew. That the desire had lived inside them far longer than the journey itself. That was when the presence made itself known. Not with noise. Not with threat. Just a shift in the air. As if the night acknowledged them. And then, a voice. Not loud. Not commanding. Simply calm. The kind of voice that never needed to repeat itself. It did not offer anything. It only spoke a question. A question so gentle, so precise, that it felt as though it had been waiting years to be asked. Those who returned from the crossroads rarely spoke of what they saw. They spoke of what they heard. Because the voice did not ask if they were willing. It did not bargain or persuade. It said, "You already know what you want." The words were never shouted. They were not seductive. They were factual. And that was what frightened people most. Because in that moment, excuses collapsed. poverty, loss, anger, grief. None of it mattered anymore. Only desire remained. Witnesses said the question did not demand an answer. It waited for one. And waiting was worse. To speak was to admit something terrible, not to the presence, but to themselves. Some turned away then. They fled the crossroads, hearts racing, certain they had escaped something unspeakable. But many later confessed that running did not bring relief. Because the question followed them. In the quiet before sleep. In the pause before every decision. In the space between what they had and what they believed they deserved. They had not made a deal. But they had been seen. And once a desire is spoken, even silently, it does not return to where it came from. It waits. No one remembers the first person who stood at a crossroads and waited. That is how old the story is. Before churches marked the land, before roads were drawn on maps, people already believed that paths carried memory. Every traveler left something behind, a decision made, a future abandoned, a fear carried too long. Where many roads met, those fragments gathered. Not as voices or as ghosts, but as weight. Ancient cultures believed the world could only hold so much longing before it began to respond. They did not call it evil. They called it listening. In those early stories, crossroads were not places of temptation, but places of truth. If you stood there long enough, the world reflected you back to yourself. That belief survived for generations. Until one night, someone stayed too long. And the silence answered. From that moment on, the crossroads was no longer just a place where choices met, but a place where choices were spoken aloud. And once spoken, they could no longer be taken back. Those who claimed to see someone at the crossroads never described a monster. They described a man. Not tall. Not imposing. Not strange enough to fear at first glance. That was what unsettled them most. He did not arrive from any road. He did not approach. He was simply there when they noticed him. Always standing just beyond the center, never where the paths touched. As if the crossing itself rejected him. Some said he wore dark clothing that absorbed the night. Others said his face refused to stay clear in memory, as though the mind slid away from it. But one detail returned again and again. He never cast a shadow. No matter where the moon stood. And he never crossed the road. Not once. Those who watched him too long said the air tightened around him, like the moment before a storm breaks. Yet he never spoke first. He waited. Because whatever he was, he did not come to tempt. He came to listen. The legend did not spread through books. It spread through change. Villagers learned of the crossroads by watching what happened afterward. A man who returned with sudden fortune and spent it alone. A woman whose prayers were answered, yet whose joy never followed. People noticed how success arrived quickly, but peace never did. The ones who had gone to the crossroads carried something different back with them. Not wealth. Not power. Restlessness. They could not stay in one place for long. They avoided stillness. They feared silence. Because silence reminded them. Children were never told the full story. They learned it by observing adults fall quiet when night grew too deep. By the way certain roads were avoided after dark. By the way elders insisted no one linger where paths met. That was how the warning endured. Not as a tale meant to scare, but as a truth meant to be lived around. Because those who had stood at the crossroads were not cursed. They were changed. And everyone could see it. Those who stood at the crossroads were never foolish. They did not ask for gold simply because they were greedy. They did not ask for power without reason. They asked for escape. From hunger or obscurity. from grief that had hollowed them out. Some asked for talent, to be seen where they had always been invisible. Others asked only for one chance. A single life that did not feel like a punishment. The presence never judged their request. It did not promise anything either. Those who heard the voice said it waited long enough for doubt to rise, and then spoke with unsettling calm. You already know what you want. One of the oldest stories speaks of a man named Elias. He had lived his life quietly, useful to everyone, essential to no one. Kindness had made him trusted, unforgettable. When his mother died during a hard winter, he buried her with borrowed money and a silence that felt heavier than grief. That night, he walked beyond the fields. He did not bring an offering. He did not kneel. He simply stood at the crossroads and waited. At first, nothing happened. Then the wind slowed. The insects fell silent. And the night leaned closer. A man stood beside him, not arriving, not moving. Just there. The voice came softly. You already know what you want. Elias tried to deny it. But denial sounded small in that place. So he told the truth. He said he wanted to be remembered. Nothing more and nothing less. The presence did not answer. And Elias went home believing he had been foolish. At first, change came gently. People noticed him. His work traveled farther than his name ever had. Doors opened. Letters arrived. Within a year, Elias left the village behind. For a time, his story was told with pride. Until he returned. Those who saw him said he never stood still anymore. That he paced even while speaking, as though stillness frightened him. At night, he filled every room with light. Because darkness reminded him of waiting. When asked what had happened, he said only, I can still hear it. No one understood. Until one night, long after midnight, Elias walked back toward the fields. They found him at the crossroads at dawn. Alive. Standing. Eyes open. Waiting. When spoken to, he did not respond. But those who leaned close swore they heard him whisper, Not yet. Not yet. As if he were afraid to leave. As if something might follow him if he did. He was buried days later. But the road was avoided after that. Because some nights, travelers claimed to see a man standing just beyond the center, pacing, never crossing, and never leaving. From that moment on, the legends changed. People understood the price was not taken at once. It arrived slowly. Not as punishment, but as restlessness. Because the crossroads does not steal what you ask for. It gives it. And then refuses to let you rest inside it. There are stories of people who tried to go back. They believed that if they returned to the crossroads, they could undo what had been done. But the legends agree on one thing. The crossroads is not the same place twice. Some arrived and found nothing, only empty roads and indifferent night. Others said the paths no longer met. As if the world refused to repeat the moment. And a few claimed something far worse. That the presence was still there. Waiting. Not to bargain, but to remind. Because the choice had never belonged to the crossroads. It had always belonged to them. And choices, once made, do not vanish. They follow. People say the crossroads is dangerous. That you should never stop there. Never hesitate, never wait. But the danger was never the one who stood in the dark. It was the moment stillness began to feel familiar. Because the crossroads does not demand your soul. It does not chase. It does not follow. It waits. And those who once waited too long often find themselves listening for it again. In the quiet before sleep. in the pause between footsteps, in the seconds where nothing moves. That is why people do not linger. Not because something might appear, but because standing still is how it begins to feel like home. And if you ever find yourself pausing where roads cross, when the night grows thin and the world seems to hold its breath, remember, something may be waiting for you to leave or to stay.